Welcome to today's RUC People. I'm very pleased to be joined by Ros Irlam, who is a long-term friend of this church, but more recently a member.
Yes.
Good to have you here, Ros. Thanks for making time. So, Ros, I know your professional life has taken a bit of a change in recent times.
Yes.
Would you like to just tell us a little bit more about what you're doing at the moment?
Right. So I trained as a high school teacher, but took a very, very long break and did other things. But in 2018, I went back into high school teaching and teach at a school called Focus College. It's a private school, but fees are very low. So most of our children come from working class communities. And it's really very much a second chance kind of college for those who've struggled academically or with behavior issues and want a second chance there, or who've come from elsewhere in Africa and have missed some years and now are unable to enter the government stream. So we have a very different mix of learners, but together we make family, and many of them succeed well, and we are very proud to see them fly once they leave us.
And where is the school, and what do you teach exactly?
Right. So there are 3 campuses. There are 2 in Wynberg, 1 in Easterplaat, and then we have 1 in District 6 that at the moment is closed, but we're hoping to reopen soon. And I teach at the grade 10 to 12 campus at Wynberg. And I teach grade 11 and 12, English and history.
Right. And how's that been for you?
Well, it's been very challenging, I think, going back into teaching. People said to me, oh, it's a different generation. And I thought, how different can children be? Children are children. And in some ways, children are still children. Yeah. But I think it is a different generation in the sense that they found their voice, which is a very good thing, but haven't always learned the flip side of it, that it comes with responsibility and that elders still have something to tell them and teach them. And so you really have to win their respect in a much bigger way now than you used to. And also just help them to channel and use their voices appropriately. So I think that's challenging. Sometimes they bring big issues from home. I think every school faces that to some extent, but perhaps more so in our community. But the rewards are absolutely enormous. And just seeing one learner have a new sense of confidence or be able to achieve something they never thought they could. For many of them, they are the first people to matriculate in their family. For most of them, if they study further, they will be the first. So not only is that a huge achievement for them, but also trying to prepare them for that is part of our challenge. But it's a good challenge, and I'm grateful for it.
And is it demanding? Do you find it demanding emotionally in terms of time and commitment?
Yes, I think all teaching's demanding.
Yes.
Every teacher has a big workload. But I think perhaps because there's so much at stake for them, and they often don't have the support at home because no one there really gets it. It's perhaps a bit more of a demand on us. But I think the whole reason why I applied to, when I came back to teaching, to go to a school like that is because I was given so much in education, and there's such an inequality in our country even now. So it's a way of doing restitution and being able to give into communities that haven't received. So I'm glad that I have those demands.
And so, Ros, I know you and your family, well, your extended family, in fact, we joined our church recently en masse. It's been a blessing for us. But
thank you. And us.
I know you were part of, I think, Rosebank Methodist for a very long time, and that must have sort of shaped a lot of your, faith journey and the sort of commitment to make a difference in the world, which you've just described with your current vocation. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that faith journey and your experiences at Rosebank, but also what's brought you to us here at RUC?
Right. Well, in some ways, I've come home because I grew up in a manse. My father was a congregational minister, and my brother has just retired as a congregational minister. But I think what was really important for me was that in a school assembly in what is now grade 9, when a mission team came to our school, I realized that I need to make a commitment for myself to following Christ. And I think that is important when you grow up in such a church environment that your faith becomes your own. So I think that's really where I made a first firm commitment. But, of course, following Christ is an everyday commitment. And I think the things that have shaped me beyond the home environment is what's now called the Students' Christian Organization. I was involved in it as a student and then on staff for a while. And I think just learning the holistic vision of what Christ calls us to, that it's evangelism, discipleship, mission, having a worldview that you live out values in, and justice, that all of those things form part of our Christian faith. And I think that was hugely formational. I was a student during the 80s, so at the time of huge unrest and standing up for change, and I think that SCO really helped to guide me in how best to do that as a Christian. And then as a staff member with SCO, the movement itself had splintered into 4 during apartheid, along apartheid lines. And in 1997, we were able to reunite the group that was historically white English-speaking and historically black. And just being part of that process and helping to build that was an enormous formation of my faith and my commitment to seeing God's kingdom grow in every part of our country. And then when I came to Cape Town, Rosebank Methodist and its great diversity of people who call that their home was really just such a wonderful blessing. But in recent years, it's really suffered some major crises, and it didn't seem like there was any chance of those being addressed by the higher leadership in any way that we could see. And then also, during lockdown, we realized that we really enjoyed worshiping together as a family. At that stage, it was on our stoep every Sunday, but we thought this is something we'd really like to keep, and that wouldn't have been an option at Rosebank. And so we started visiting some other churches as lockdown eased, and left it to the children to decide where we should worship. And they both chose here. So we're very grateful, because I think we're all learning and growing and walking well with others here at Rondebosch. So yes, we're grateful to be here.
So Ros, take us back to the start, to where you were born, a bit about your parents and your family, your siblings, where you grew up, where you went to school.
So I was born in Pretoria. My father was a congregational minister, as I said, and my mom was an analytical chemist with the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. And she used to measure trace samples in air pollution. So she was quite an expert in her real quiet way. I only realized that many years later, because she always just got on with things so quietly. And then my primary schooling was at our nearest local school, Arcadia Primary, and under the very compassionate and firm gaze of a Miss Matthews. She was our principal. I never once heard her raise her voice, and yet children just adored her and always listened to her. But it was a little bit like being in the last outpost of the British Empire. So, but I think it was a school that really grounded me well and gave me a love for learning. So I'm very grateful for all of that. And then I went right across town, had to catch 2 buses to go to my high school. And I think people were slightly shocked that my parents didn't send me to Pretoria Girls. I was supremely grateful. Nothing against Pretoria Girls, but I just gained so much from going to Hillview High School. It was regarded as one of the slum schools in the working area of Pretoria. And yet, as government schools went in apartheid days, it was pretty diverse. It was only 50% South Africans, some of whom were Afrikaans speakers, even though it was an English medium school. And we had Portuguese and Italians and Polish and just about every other nation you want to mention, Chinese, all coming to the school. So I think the life lessons that it taught me in terms of getting on with people, appreciating the wealth that others bring into your life has just set me on a journey for the rest of my life. So, and there was nothing wrong with the education I got there either. So very grateful to that high school.
And siblings?
Did I cover that part? Right. I've got a brother, as I mentioned. He entered the ministry fairly late in life, but has just retired and is married. And then a sister who lives here in Cape Town, works for the Naval Staff College. And she has 3 children, 2 of whom are overseas and 1 here in Cape Town as well. So,
right.
Yeah. And then on James's side, most of his siblings are here. So we have a wonderful extended family in Cape Town. We're really blessed.
Yeah. Okay. And the school years, did you have a sense, were you a good student? Did you enjoy your studies? And did you have a sense of what you wanted to do when you were leaving school?
Well, I had all sorts of romantic ideas when I started. I was going to be a game ranger and then an actress. But I think by about grade 10, I realized that teaching was in the blood. Just about every woman in my family, except for my mom, has been a teacher. So it's just in the genes. But yeah, I was a good student, but I think I also made the most of schooling in the sense that it wasn't just about the academics. I tried to get involved in many different aspects of educational life, so thoroughly enjoyed my
sport,
schooling.
drama.
Yes, I'm not very sporty, but I did play sociable hockey, but did a little bit of running. But I was very involved in drama and choir and scripture union and interact and the cultural side and the service side of school.
Wonderful. Okay. And so when you left school, did you go to study teaching?
I did. I went to Rhodes University, which was where my parents met, so they were thrilled that one of their children could go to their alma mater. But I think I went for the adventure of going somewhere different. It's largely a residential campus, so I was in Res for 4 of my 5 years, and then in Digs with some friends in the last year, and did a BA majoring English and history, and then a teacher's diploma, and then an honours in teaching English as a second language. So.
And you enjoyed life in Grahamstown for those 4 years?
Very much. Yeah, I loved being there. I think as an adult, perhaps Grahamstown, Makanda, as it is now, is perhaps a little bit too enclosed and can get a little incestuous. But I think as a student, it's a wonderful place to be. You just, because it's small enough, you really get to know people. And just walking to and from lectures, you greet 10 people, and you can really form very good, close friendships. So I was very grateful for that.
So 5 years preparing to be a teacher, then into the big world to actually start teaching.
Yes.
Is that how it worked?
It did, and much to my initial shock. Because I had a teacher's bursary, I was sent to what was then called Witbank, now in Malahleni. And my mother, having done air pollution research, I knew this was one of the most polluted areas of South Africa, still is. And I also knew it was terribly conservative. So when I first heard I was going there, I went into the room of one of my digs mates, and I just sat there and gibbered for about half an hour. Like, I know I said to God I'd go anywhere, but Witbank isn't anywhere. But God really does know best, because much to my surprise, I loved it there. I spent 6 years teaching in one of the government high schools there. I think being in a smaller town, you get far greater opportunities than you do if you start off teaching in a big city. So quite soon I was actually teaching grade 12s and learning and growing. A friend of mine began an initiative to teach on Saturdays at one of the township schools, opening it up to anyone who wanted to come. And that was an eye-opener for me. You know, I think my learners took their education pretty much for granted. These learners were desperate for someone who would just give them some tools and some skills. And I don't think I was very skilled at giving them that, but I did my best and hopefully helped some of them. And then during that time, schools were given the option of opening to all races, what was called a Model C school. And our school agreed to that. 80% of parents had to agree, and they did. And so being there in the years when education really began to normalize in government schools was incredibly exciting. And I've got lots of stories, so don't get me started. But it was really just wonderful to be part of that and seeing South Africa begin to actually become a normal society.
Yeah. And it must have been, you know, for someone, first job, completely different place. Did you know anyone there?
I didn't. I found a really loving, nurturing church community in the Presbyterian church there, so that really supported me.
Yeah.
The school, I think we had a lovely team of staff, and that was also a big support. But there was something else I wanted to say. Oh, yes. The other thing that I really learned in Witbank was that very conservative people are actually not monsters. I think because I'd been quite an activist at Rhodes, I'd formed this subconscious idea. And yet I met some incredibly conservative people and realized how they were very generous-hearted. And often, when they saw that they'd been wrong, were able to acknowledge that and change far better than some of us liberals. We were quite blinded to our own faults and stereotypes and preconceptions. So it was a very good learning experience all around.
Great. So what happened after Witbank?
So then I was approached by the Students' Christian Association, as it was then, to consider joining staff, and went through a number of interviews with them, and so we all agreed this was God's way forward. And so I joined as a staff worker in KwaZulu-Natal. Got there at the beginning of 1994, so I was part of the whole election process and watched I was part of the prayer meeting at which we were all in Kings Park Stadium. People from every walk of life were there praying that things would go peacefully in KwaZulu-Natal, as there was just such terrible bloodshed happening. And completely unknown to us, but behind the scenes, people were meeting with Mangosuthu Buthelezi and trying to persuade him to bring the IFP into the elections. And he refused and went to catch his plane to Ulundi, and half an hour later came back to the meeting and said, "There's a technical problem in my plane. It won't start. Nobody knows what's wrong. I think God wants me to be in this meeting." And 2 days later, 1 week before the elections, he brought the IFP in and saved a complete bloodbath in KwaZulu-Natal. So just to be part of that and to watch that whole working of God happen was just amazing. And then I was also an election observer, so to see how that miracle happened was really special.
Wow.
And then to be part of seeing what was SCA and SCM come together and form the Students' Christian Organization, and to begin to walk that road with fellow staff, with students. My students came from Nongoma down to Port Shepstone, Durban, across to what would be Newcastle. So huge distances, but we tried to bring people together in the schools and in the higher institutions as regularly as we could. And to see people learn and grow together was very special.
Wonderful. So the role with SCO,
Yes.
where was that based?
So I was based in Durban, but travelled quite a lot, as you can gather. And then after 4 years, in that time, I re-met James. He and I we'd served on the National Students' Council of SCA when we were students. And so we kind of kept a bit in contact, which means that James would write a letter. It would take me 6 months to reply, and then he'd write back in 2 weeks, and it would take me another 6 months to reply. So you can tell which of us is the organised one. And then after about a year of my being on staff, the person who is in charge of the graduate side of the work in KwaZulu-Natal wanted to step down. And so we looked for somebody who would be able to take on that. And James was just about to move to Durban from northern KwaZulu-Natal. So we approached him, and it meant that he and I worked quite closely together. And after a couple of months, we suddenly realized that we were looking at each other with new eyes. After 10 years of knowing each other, we suddenly discovered something new there.
So it wasn't quite love at first sight.
Not at all. And my students thought it was hilarious. And I assured all of them that at least it meant I didn't have to worry about making a good first impression. Also, nobody believes me that I approached him to take on that role completely innocently, but truly I did. So,
wow. Okay.
Then he moved down here.
Yeah.
End of 1996, and I joined him a year later in 1997, and continued to work here in the Western Cape with SCO for another 5 years.
And somewhere along the line, you and James got married, I assume.
Yes, end of 1997.
Right. Okay. So, how was the move to Cape Town for you? And
well, I think for me it was a slight mystery in the beginning, because I thought, there are such big needs everywhere in South Africa, but if there's any place that's a little less needy, it's Cape Town. So why on earth is God taking us there? Until we realized what a polarized society we have here in Cape Town, and realized that that's something that we could at least be a small part of building God's kingdom and just drawing people together. Which I guess takes us to crossing bridges, because after my second child was on the way, so Hugh used to travel everywhere with me for the first 2 years of his life. He was 4 months old when we went to Limpopo for a conference with SCO, and this little baby would disappear off into a crowd of 500 students every lunchtime, and after a while I'd hear, "Wee!" somewhere far away, and he'd be brought back, and so he's been a part of sort of belonging to everybody ever since he was tiny. But when Amy was on the way, then we decided that for a number of reasons that it was time to invest into their lives particularly, and so I finished my time with SCO, was a full-time mom for 2 years, realized quite quickly I'm a bit of a monster mom when I don't have some adult interaction in my life. So after 2 years, I joined UCT as a part-time facilitator on one of their health sciences first-year courses, which was wonderful and great fun, and had very nice, clear boundaries on time, so could be a mom and that. But being back on campus and looking around and realizing as I said, what a polarized society we live in, and looking at Jamie's steps and seeing all these little cultural clusters and nobody actually, I thought, wow, some of the things that we experimented with and learned in bringing SEO into being, these could be, you know, for students. And so we continued work there. And then when I looked at society beyond UCT, I thought, this isn't just for students, everybody needs this. So I chatted to one of my colleagues who was still working for SEO at that point, Poliswa Mkontwana, and she and I went to SEO and said, these things that we've learned, can we apply them to broader society and other age groups beyond students? And they gave us their blessing. And so Crossing Bridges Africa was born, which was a non-profit aimed at helping people overcome the divides that we've put into the society. And we called it Crossing Bridges because we believe that the bridges are there. We don't have to build them. We've got way more in common than we realize, but we need to find those bridges and the courage to cross them. And so we drew people together. They usually would have something in common already. They'd go to the same church or work in the same place, and then we'd help them to share their stories with one another, share meals. That was always the highlight. Once we'd got small groups providing a meal of some kind every week, we probably didn't need to do much else. Breaking bread together is just such a powerful thing. But we help people just to be able to appreciate the wealth that they had and the commonalities that they had, and plan the next steps. So it was a very rich time. We always used to joke in the organization and say, we have so much wealth here, we just don't have any money.
I was going to ask you, how did you manage to sort of keep this show on the road? You know?
Well, for 7 years we did, through God's grace. But what we generally found was people would say to us, what you're doing is so terribly important, but it's not what we're funding right now.
Yes.
So, and eventually the funding did run out, but we came to the conclusion that we'd sown our seeds into the wind, and God would take them and use them where they needed to go, and our season was over. And so that was the end of 2017, and that's when I began teaching the next year. Yes.
And the Crossing Bridges experience, as you reflect back on that, you know, do you feel like it was really important? I mean, you know, of course it was important.
I know what you're saying.
But you know, how do you look back on it now and think, you know, you've seen those seeds grow and develop in different ways you may not have imagined, you know?
Well, it's hard to point to particular things and say, oh, you know, that person's grown because of us, because I don't think it's ever one influence on people's lives. And also I think work like that, you often don't see the fruits immediately. So it's hard to tell. But I think there are two ways. I think, first of all, if I look at the impact that it's had on me and some of the facilitators and how we've learned and grown, I think quite early on, I learned a kingdom principle that you always gain more than you give in God's kingdom. So I think that just how we've learned and grown through that experience has been remarkable. And certainly some of the cross-cultural understanding, but also the humility that nobody has got all the answers and nobody gets it right all the time, and all of us, because of where we come from, are not going to see the full picture. I think all of those things have been really good lessons to take into teaching in a cross-cultural community that I teach in. Yeah, it's quite funny. At my school, everyone mocks me for my accent, and yet, you know, we have Cape Flats accents all over the show of different flavors and brands, and just to be able to have the humility to go, yeah, that's fine. I understand, and I don't have all the answers. You come with expertise from your communities that I don't have. So I think it's had a big impact on me, and then also I remember Hugh was talking once about how he always kind of took his upbringing for granted, and then when he met people who hadn't had that upbringing, he suddenly realized how his whole life had been about crossing bridges, and he'd been given the skills to do it without even realizing. Now, I don't think that was me. I think it was the organization and the people he met there. But I'm very grateful that those skills have been passed on to my children, and that often the choices they make are because of that. So I'm grateful for that. But I think often the seeds that we plant, we don't see the results. I think of that thing that Paul wrote in Corinthians, where he says, I planted the seed and Apollos watered it and God made it grow. Yes. So I think often we won't see those results ourselves, yes, but they're there and God's making them grow.
And was it largely about sort of just facilitating conversations and interactions between people who might not otherwise?
Yes, they were occupying some sort of space together, so a workplace or a church. Yeah. Building, but weren't making the connections, or perhaps had started to, but really wanted to deepen that. Right. And so one of the big things was at the end of the time to say, well, you've had a wonderful time together, but how is this going to make a difference? What's your next step or two to start deepening this, carrying it further beyond the time we've had together? And I think, having said I haven't seen the results, certainly and particularly in some of the church communities we worked in, we do still see how they're walking together, growing together, deepening those relationships. So we're grateful for that.
And obviously your other most important role in life is a mother. Yes. How have you sort of managed to, harmonise that with crossing bridges, teaching,
well, I was very grateful that I was in crossing bridges through their most formative years, because I think teaching can be a bit all-consuming. And crossing bridges was very clear that raising two children was as much of an investment, if not more of an investment in the new South Africa as our NPO was. So I think I was always given the space to be able to do that and to prioritize them. So I was very grateful to Crossing Bridges for that. I generally get on best with young adults. So I'm loving my children now and the life stage they're in. But just to be able to have fun, to have the experiences and the time with them when they were younger was really important and valued, and being able to read books together and do stuff together. It was lovely. And now, as I say, they're young adults, and so they always joke about my other children when I talk about school, but they don't resent it. They understand why I'm where I am and support me in that. So that's really good.
So I wanted to ask you about what does fun look like for Ros. I get the sense you're a very committed, loyal person, with a strong sense of service. But do you also, find time to nurture you and to have fun and to do stuff that makes you smile when you're not necessarily helping someone or serving someone or teaching someone?
Right. Well, it's been one of my commitments for this year that I'm actually going to include fun exercise. So I did Zumba some years ago and loved it, and then somehow dropped out of my life, and so I've made the commitment to put that back in, and so I've joined a group in Bridgetown and in Athlone. Been there for 2 weeks, so you can't see the fabulous body yet, but we're working on it. But mostly it's actually just for the fun, and to have that space. So I'm doing that, and then I love reading and watching movies and going to coffee. Don't get to do most of those during term time, but try and slot it in as much as possible during weekends. I'm a very eclectic reader. I enjoy reading quite a lot of nonfiction, especially biographies of inspiring people, or issues around education, justice. I leave most of the environment reading to James, and then occasionally he'll say, "You've got to read this one," and then I will.
Yes.
But so it's the non-fiction side. And then fiction, again, whodunits I enjoy. I actually read quite a lot of young adult fiction. My excuse in the old days was so that I could know what my children were reading. But actually, it's because a lot of it is really good and I really enjoy it. And then some fantasy, although less of that now because fantasies tend to be long series and I just don't have the time or concentration for them. But yeah, so I'm a very eclectic reader and listener to music and so on. Yeah, and that's the other thing. I love listening to music, and that I can do anytime, which is lovely.
And I get a sense, Ros, that, your life has been very much shaped by your faith and your sense of, calling, if you like. And that you described how that came at a very young age, have there been sort of particular trials in your life that's had to sustain you through? Have there been difficult challenges you've had to overcome?
I think partly because I'm a white South African, but I think also because I've had the blessing of a very stable home life and a stable marriage. I really haven't had enormous challenges, but I think perhaps being a student in a time of the state of emergency and being an activist, there were times I was arrested twice, kept overnight once, so it was very minimal compared to what so many people faced. But I think that really did challenge what I believed and how I would act on it and how I would respond to it. So I think that was quite a challenge to my faith. And then some years ago, James and I had some tenants in a house that we bought with the idea that we would retire there. That idea slightly changed, but that's not important. But these particular tenants, we'd given them notice and they refused to move, and it all got really ugly because we had new tenants who were coming in. And again, just how do you respond to that as a Christian? How do you, treat people who have done you wrong? And also the financial challenge that potentially was there. So all of that was very formative for my faith. And just one of the things that really amazed me at that time, we just read a book about somebody who had faced a financial crisis and said to God, I'm not going to stop giving to the things that I think are important and part of your kingdom building. In fact, I'm going to increase what I give. And so we thought, well, this is our chance. And so we did exactly that. And for the 7 months where we struggled to get these people out of the house and where they did not pay 1 cent towards rental, we actually didn't notice it. And I still don't know how. God's economy is a mystery. But it really, really, truly, God came through, and that was remarkable.
Yeah.
And then just this last year, our family tries to have a retreat time together at least twice a year and more often if we can. And we'd had one in December 2021. And one of the things we'd done was to choose a picture with a verse and color it in. And the verse that just kept calling me was one that I couldn't understand because it didn't fit where I was at all. But I took it and I colored it in and I said to family, I don't know why I've chosen this, but here it is. And then 2 weeks later, I was diagnosed with a cancerous growth on my kidney, and the kidney had to be removed, and it was cancer. And the verse was, the Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. Now, as you can hear from my life, being still might be my bigger challenge. But that verse just became such an important thing for me. And through the 4 or 5 months of this, I really just saw how God did take on what needed to be fought, whether it was, the health system or the actual surgery or the recovery process. God did the work, and I could actually just be still. I had an epidural for the pain, and when they took that out, I had to lie flat on my back and stare at the hospital ceiling for 4 hours. So I thought to God, this is taking being still to a whole new level. But besides that, it was really a remarkable experience, and also just a remarkable experience of our health system working well. I was both at RUC for part of it and in the private sector for part of it. And just seeing committed health workers was also really amazing. But I think it was a time of really building my faith in ways that I didn't expect from a completely unexpected source. Yeah.
And are you fully recovered?
I am. One of the really wonderful things about cancer of the kidney compared to other cancers is that usually it's very localized, and they were able to get it out completely. And I'll go back once a year just to have a checkup and see everything's still clear, but I didn't need any further treatment. So I don't think any cancer is pleasant to have, but it was a blessing in a way that it was that, and that I am fully recovered. So thank you, God.
Yes. And after so many years at Rosebank, was that quite a wrench leaving? And how are you feeling comfortable being here at RUC with us?
It was very hard to leave. I still miss some of the people terribly, but I tried to leave well so that if I see them on the street, I won't have to cross over and pretend I didn't notice them, but that I can greet them and really still keep the connection. So that was the hard part that I think I'm still grieving for. But coming to RUC has been a delight. I think the church is, I'd love to see it a little more diverse. I think it's probably a wish of all of us. But it is, quite sadly remarkably in the sense that how many years into democracy? Nearly 30 years, and churches are still often very localized places in terms of culture and class. But I think that Rondebosch is crossing those boundaries in ways that many other churches aren't. So I'm so grateful for that. But also the people are so welcoming and inspiring, and nobody ever puts pressure on you, but just there's so many people to live up to here. There are lots and lots of people, many of whom are younger than I am, but I look at them and go, when I grow up, I want to be like you. So it's a wonderful place to be. I love the worship, the way that so many different things are genuinely integrated into it. It never feels as if someone's been forced in or tacked on. And it's just been a really good place to walk together and to grow. So, very grateful and blessed to be here.
Great. And finally, what's next for Ros? Any new exciting developments on the horizon?
Well, we at that stage in our lives, and we can't quite believe it, where we're starting to think about retirement. So it's like, how could we get there? It's still a little way down the line, but thinking about the possibility of when I stop full-time teaching, of doing some tutoring or teacher's assistant work at schools where they wouldn't be able to afford that normally, but being able to donate my services, as it were. I mentioned that I've started Zumba again and some Pilates. And so I obviously want to keep that on. But on my bucket list is doing dragon boat racing. So when I'm retired, that's going to be something I'll pick up.
Talk to Jackie de Laporte.
Thank you.
She's very keen.
Right. Okay. So there's a friend I can do it with. But so that's on the bucket list. James and I would love to travel a bit. We don't really have a big budget for that, but I discovered when I was in SCO and earning a missionary salary that I did a huge amount of traveling as, in sort of mission work. So who knows what God's got in store. There might be travels that involve other things as well. So we'll see.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ros. It's been a pleasure to hear more of your story, get to know you better, and we're delighted to have you here at RUC with us. And
thank you.
Thank you for the contributions you're already making.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a real blessing to be here.
Cool.